Before we begin, I need to tell you something almost no one warns stroke survivors about. Most people do not die from the stroke itself. They die from what happens after. There is a silent biological countdown that continues ticking long after you leave the hospital, and it does not care who you are. Imagine surviving a massive earthquake. The ground stops shaking, the dust settles, and you think the danger has passed. The foundation shifts. A fire starts in the basement that you cannot see. This is exactly what happens in the human brain after a cerebrovascular accident, commonly known as a stroke. We treat the acute event, the clot or the bleed, and we celebrate the survival. But for millions of patients, the stroke was just the opening chapter. There is a silent progression, a series of biological dominoes that continues to fall years after the ambulance has left the driveway. Today, we are not just talking about survival. We are going to uncover the hidden, late-stage effects of a stroke that doctors often miss and families rarely understand. One more thing. The celebration often comes too early at a false finish line. To understand this, I want to introduce you to a patient of mine. Let's call him Robert. Robert was 55, an architect who loved intricate details. He suffered an ischemic stroke affecting his right middle cerebral artery. He survived. He did his rehab. He learned to walk again. 3 months post-stroke, he was discharged. Everyone celebrated. They thought the war was won. But 6 months later, Robert walked into my clinic, and he was not the same man who rang the survivor bell at the rehabilitation center. He was exhausted. His right hand, which had been loose and weak, was now tight and curled against his chest. He was crying uncontrollably, even though he told me he did not feel sad. And most terrifyingly for him, he was starting to forget the names of his grandchildren. What Robert was experiencing is what we call the late effects of cerebrovascular accident. You see, when a part of the brain dies due to lack of blood flow, the damage does not stay contained within that dead zone. The brain is a network. If you cut a major wire in New York, the lights might flicker in New Jersey. We usually divide stroke recovery into phases. The acute phase is survival. The subacute phase is relearning. But the chronic phase is where the real mystery lies. This is where the brain attempts to rewire itself, but sometimes it wires itself incorrectly. We call this maladaptive plasticity. And Robert's body was hiding an aftershock far more dangerous than the first. Let us look deep into Robert's nervous system. In a healthy body, your brain is constantly sending signals down to your muscles, telling them to relax. It is like a teacher keeping a rowdy classroom calm. When the stroke damaged Robert's motor cortex, that teacher disappeared. Without that inhibitory signal from the brain, the muscles in his arm became overactive. They started firing uncontrollably. This is called spasticity. It is not just stiffness, it is a velocity-dependent increase in muscle tone. It means the faster Robert tried to move his arm, the harder his arm fought back. This usually does not happen immediately. It creeps in weeks or months later as the nervous system attempts to recover. The scariest part is this: the pain wasn't coming from his arm at all. What Robert felt wasn't muscle pain. It wasn't joint pain. It was the brain misfiring, sending distorted electric signals that turned a simple touch into agony. But spasticity was not Robert's only physical ghost. He complained of a burning, freezing sensation in his arm, as if it were being scalded by hot water and packed in ice at the same time. Even the touch of a bedsheet was agonizing. This is a condition known as central post-stroke pain. The brain starts misinterpreting innocent signals. It thinks a gentle breeze is a knife attack. This is difficult to treat because the pain is not in the arm. The pain is in the brain itself. The stroke damaged the sensory pathways, specifically the spinothalamic tract and the thalamus, which act as the relay station for sensation. Because of this damage, the brain starts misinterpreting innocent signals. It thinks a gentle breeze is a knife attack. Robert felt betrayed by his own body, but the most profound betrayal was happening in a place no one could see. Before we dive into the neurological changes that were affecting Robert's personality and memory, I want to ask you a favor. If you or a loved one are navigating life after a stroke, you know how lonely this road can be. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel so we can get this vital information to the millions of survivors who are searching for answers right now. And the changes inside his brain were only beginning. And then something happened that no one expected. About a year after his stroke, Robert's wife pulled me aside. She said, "Doctor, he is forgetting things, not just keys. He forgot how to read a blueprint." This brings us to one of the most significant and under-discussed late effects: vascular cognitive impairment. There is a misconception that if you survive the stroke, your thinking remains stable. However, a stroke increases the risk of developing dementia significantly. We often call this vascular dementia. Here is the advanced medical reality of why this happens. It is not just about the initial scar. It is about a process called secondary neurodegeneration. When neurons die during the initial stroke, they release toxic chemicals and inflammatory signals. These signals can travel along the white matter tracts, the highways of the brain, and cause inflammation in healthy areas of the brain far away from the original injury. Think of it like a forest fire. The fire might be out, but the smoke damage is spreading to the neighboring towns. In Robert's case, the stroke was in his motor area, but the inflammation was slowly affecting his hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, the areas responsible for memory and planning. This can lead to deficits in executive function. Patients struggle with multitasking, planning their day, or managing finances. It is often subtle at first. Family members might think it is just depression or fatigue, but it is a physiological change in the brain structure. This is the silent aftershock. But is this damage permanent, or does the brain have a way to fight back? The answer is complex, and it leads us to the emotional storm Robert was facing. But there is another hidden truth that Robert and millions of survivors never hear about. A stroke is not just a moment, it is a beginning. When brain cells die, they release chemicals that work like smoke from a house fire. The flames may be out, but the toxic smoke drifts into neighboring rooms, damaging everything it touches. Inside Robert's brain, this smoke traveled along the white matter highways, reaching areas untouched by the original stroke: the hippocampus, the thalamus, the prefrontal cortex, places responsible for memory, planning, and identity. Doctors call this secondary neurodegeneration, a slow, silent erosion of healthy brain tissue that can continue for months or years. It is the biological explanation for why many survivors seem stable, only to experience a sudden decline long after the stroke. It is not another stroke. It is the ripple effect of the first one, still unfolding in the dark. But the emotional aftershocks were the ones his family feared most. Do you remember I mentioned Robert was crying, even when he was not sad? He would be watching a funny commercial on television and suddenly burst into tears. 5 minutes later, he would be laughing hysterically at something that was not funny. This terrified his family. They thought he was losing his mind. He was not. He was suffering from the pseudobulbar effect. To understand this, we have to look at the brain stem. We have a pathway that connects our frontal lobes, our thinking brain, to the cerebellum and brain stem, our primitive reflex brain. The frontal lobe acts as a gatekeeper. It controls our emotional expression. It ensures we laugh only when things are funny and cry only when we are sad. The stroke damaged this pathway. The gatekeeper was gone. So the emotional reflexes were running wild, disconnected from his actual feelings. This is distinctly different from depression, though post-stroke depression is also incredibly common and dangerous. Post-stroke depression is a chemical imbalance caused by the disruption of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. Robert was dealing with a triple threat: the physical pain of spasticity, the cognitive fog of vascular impairment, and the emotional volatility of the pseudobulbar affect. It sounds overwhelming. It sounds hopeless. But this is where the story shifts. This is where we stop looking at the damage and we start looking at the potential. Yet even in all this darkness, something unexpected emerged: the resolution and hope. We sat down with Robert and his wife. We stopped treating him like an acute stroke patient and started treating him as a chronic survivor. For the spasticity, we used targeted botulinum toxin injections to relax the muscles and intense physical therapy to retrain the brain. For the central post-stroke pain, we moved away from standard painkillers, which do not work well for brain pain, and used specific anticonvulsant medications that calm the overactive firing of the nerves. For the emotional volatility, we educated the family. Once they understood that the crying was a reflex, not a meltdown, the anxiety in the house dropped. We used medication to help stabilize those pathways. There was another piece of Robert's puzzle that almost everyone overlooked: his sleep. Not the kind of sleep you can see from the outside, but what happens deep inside the brain during the night. When a healthy person falls into deep sleep, the brain opens a hidden plumbing system, the glymphatic system. The brain cells shrink slightly, allowing waves of cerebrospinal fluid to wash through the tissue like a nighttime cleaning crew, sweeping away waste, toxins, and damaged proteins. But after a stroke, that system often breaks. The gates do not open. The waste does not wash out. And day by day, night by night, toxic molecules begin to accumulate in the very regions responsible for memory and clarity. This is why some survivors feel permanently foggy, why they wake up exhausted, why dementia seems to creep in even when everything looked fine on the scan. Robert was not just fighting his stroke. He was fighting a brain that could no longer clean itself. And for the cognitive issues, we engaged Robert in cognitive rehabilitation. We realized that while the brain had suffered inflammation, it was still capable of neurogenesis, the creation of new connections. Robert returned to looking at simple blueprints. He started exercising, which we now know releases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that acts like fertilizer for brain cells. He did not go back to being the man he was at 54. but he became a functional, happy version of the man he was at 56. What gives me even more hope today is that modern neuroscience is no longer accepting the old belief that recovery stops after 6 months. We are entering a new era, one where the brain can be pushed to relearn in ways we once believed were impossible. And this is where modern neuroscience changed everything. One of the most powerful tools is vagus nerve stimulation. A tiny device, no larger than a coin, is implanted under the skin. Each time a survivor practices a movement, lifting a finger, grasping a cup, the device sends a signal up the vagus nerve that tells the brain, "Pay attention, this matters. Rewire this." Even survivors years after their stroke have regained function using this method. And then there is a breakthrough no one expected. Researchers discovered a molecular break inside the brain called CCR5, a receptor that shuts down learning and recovery after injury. But if that break is turned off, the brain begins to reconnect at a pace we have never seen before. A simple pill, originally created for HIV treatment, may hold the key to reopening the recovery window long after everyone thought it was closed. And while the results are promising, this is emerging science, not something doctors can prescribe routinely yet. Hope is no longer a wish in stroke recovery. It is becoming a science. Here is the truth I need you to take away. A cerebrovascular accident is not a single event on a calendar. It is a chronic condition that requires lifelong management. If you or someone you love is noticing these late effects, the stiffness, the pain, the memory slips, the emotional roller coasters, do not dismiss them as just aging or just part of the stroke. These are treatable medical conditions. Go back to your neurologist. Ask about spasticity management. Ask about cognitive screenings. The brain is resilient, but it needs your help to heal. I have prepared a resource regarding the early warning signs of these late effects that you can discuss with your doctor. Please share this video. You might save someone from suffering in silence. I will see you in the next video.